Hello, I'm Ros Atkins. Thank you very much indeed for joining me on this week's World Have Your Say. Now, President Obama says the world is being scared by the Eurozone crisis. And certainly when I look through the comment that you're sending into the BBC, there's a lot of concern, but there are also many, many questions. So we've invited the BBC's business editor, Robert Peston, onto World Have Your Say to answer as many of them as he can. You can tweet Robert now using the WISE hashtag. And then in about 30 minutes' time, we'll turn our attention to Saudi Arabia. Women have been told they can stand in elections and vote. And there's been that story in Jeddah about a woman being sentenced to lashes for driving, though that sentence has now been revoked, it seems. We'll get your reaction from Saudi Arabia in about 30 minutes' time. And Robert Peston is with us now. Hi, Robert. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hi, Ros.
And those of you watching, if you want to tweet Robert now with questions on the Eurozone crisis, use the WISE hashtag, as I was saying, and we'll pick up all of your messages. Robert Peston is the BBC's business editor. He's also one of the most respected commentators on the state of the global economy, and he's going to be answering your questions about the Eurozone crisis over the next 30 minutes. Let's pull up an email for you, Robert, from Gary. He says, let me just pull up that email. In fact, there we go. Gary says, the issue has been framed as frugal, hard-working Germans bailing out indolent, over-entitled Greeks. Isn't the German government really just making up for the mistakes of bankers from Germany and elsewhere? So lots of debate about the real cause of this crisis.
Yes, and look, there is some truth to that particular assertion. Let's be clear, French bankers, German bankers, they lent far too much money to vulnerable economies, whether it's Greece or Ireland or Portugal. And of course, in the good times, they made big profits out of all of that. And they're now terribly fearful of incurring substantial losses, which is why there's a lot of pressure from banks for there not to be significant defaults on the money that's owed to banks. Also, let's be clear, in the boom years, Germany as a country did very well out of all that borrowing that the likes of Greece and Ireland and Portugal took on. Because what did they do with a lot of that debt when they incurred it? They bought German goods, they bought German stuff. So a lot of Germany's growth during the good years was a direct result of all that excessive borrowing that these countries were taking on. So the notion that in some senses, you know, the bad guys are those with the debts and the good guys are the countries like Germany, which have lower debts and are now being called on to help in the rescue, I think that's oversimplistic.
Robert, thanks for your answer. Gary, thank you for the question. And wherever you're watching the BBC in the world, you can call us to speak to Robert Peston. The number is country code 44 2070 83 72 72. Now, both I and Robert have been tweeting about him coming onto the programme. James in the UK tweeted us back and said he wanted to come onto the show. James, welcome. What's your question?
Hi, Robert. I'm wondering whether you think that the Greece situation may prompt other countries to think about leaving the euro.
You're quite faint there.
I think he wanted to ask you whether the Greek crisis may make other countries think about leaving the euro.
OK. I mean, I think that the great fear for the leading countries of the euro is that any country will leave the euro, because they're really genuinely terrified that even if it looks to be in the interests of a country like Greece, for example, to get out of the monetary union, if it, as and when it did that, that would really scare creditors of other countries, like creditors of Ireland and Portugal, that the monies that they are owed, currently in euros, will eventually be converted into a weaker, softer currency. And the kind of credit crunch which is already going on within the Eurozone would just get a lot worse, and that credit conditions would become really desperately serious throughout the Eurozone. It would be very difficult for the Eurozone to raise any money at all from commercial investors, and that would tip the Eurozone into a recession, or even something worse than a recession, a depression. So, although there are economists who think that at some point the exit of Greece from the Eurozone has to be organised right now, because, simply because, with a currency as strong as the euro for Greece, it's very difficult for Greek businesses ever to compete in a serious way, very difficult, therefore, for the Greek economy to recover. Right now, I have to say, the leaders of pretty much every Eurozone country regard the exit of any country from the Eurozone as absolutely horrific.
James, thanks for your question. Let's stay on the issue of what to do with the euro. Ari has got in touch with this point. He'd like to ask you, Robert, why haven't the euro countries thought of dividing the eurozone into north and south? Would that be a viable option?
Well, in theoretical terms, actually dividing the eurozone into two groups of economies which have a little bit more in common with each other, and I think that is what this question is aiming at, a sort of northern grouping of countries like the Netherlands and Germany, great exporting nations, very, very efficient manufacturing nations, versus the more service tourism-based economies of others, and as it happens, the other economies also happen to be, on the whole, rather more indebted. There is a sort of theoretical attraction to that. However, it would be a logistical nightmare to organise. What you have to remember is that trillions and trillions of euros of contracts relating to debts, but also all kinds of other kinds of business dealings, have been written. And rewriting those contracts into the new, Northern Euro and Southern Euro contracts that would be required, it's a sort of mind-boggling exercise that would be incredibly hard to do. And along the way, the problem is that if you happen to be a business that was on one side rather than the other side, and your creditors didn't like what was happening to, what they were owed, if somebody who's lent to, a Spanish company, for example, assuming that they're lending in the current so-called hard euro, and suddenly they get a softer southern, European euro, they're going to panic. They're going to want their money back immediately in the hard euros that exist today. It would be, both a logistical nightmare and, rather like this issue of having any country leave the euro, it could cause such a panic among investors and creditors that, again, we'd be careering towards recession or even depression.
And Robert, just before we speak to Raja and Jordan, just to be clear, George Papandreou, the Greek Prime Minister, is meeting fellow European leaders today. The idea of splitting the euro isn't even on the agenda, is it?
Oh, no, not remotely. These are all very interesting theoretical ideas, about how the kind of crisis we're in at the moment can be avoided over the long term. And who knows if Europe and, the UK and the world returns to a period of genuinely sustainable prosperity, these sorts of ideas may not become quite so frightening, and some kind of reform might be necessary. But these sorts of reforms are almost impossible to do in a period of such economic weakness of the sort we're, I'm afraid, living through at the moment.
Let's bring in Raja. He's a businessman in Jordan. Raja, what's your question for the BBC's Robert Peston?
Yes, Robert. I was wondering, why doesn't Europe, especially those countries that have surpluses, as Germany, decide to bail out Greece and stop that turmoil in world markets? Not declaring that they're going to bail out Greece has caused an international crisis in world markets, in equities, precious metals, etc. So I was wondering, it's far beyond Greece and Europe.
That is absolutely right. And in terms of the scale of the crisis, this is now genuine concern for the world as a whole. Look, in fairness to Germany, they are making the biggest contribution to the current form of the bailout. The European Financial Stability Facility currently has resources of 440, or will have, sorry, when all Eurozone governments have voted for it, it will have resources of 440 billion euros. By far and away the biggest contributor to the firepower of that bailout fund are German taxpayers. The problem is that many world leaders, many economists, many creditors and investors don't believe that firepower of 440 billion euros is enough to solve this problem. Because it has, of course, gone wider than Greece. Right now, what is desperately worrying world leaders is the extent to which the borrowing costs of Italy, which has way bigger debts than Greece in its public sector, the extent to which its borrowing costs have risen to levels that are not far off being dangerously high. Now, one of the ways that those interest costs have been kept down is that the European Central Bank has been buying Italian debt, and to an extent that's another risk going on to the German balance sheet, because again Germany is the biggest supporter of the European Central Bank. So I think what one has to say is this, that the Germans have moved quite a long way. I mean, a year ago, in the context of the German political consensus, it would have been inconceivable a year ago that the Germans would have made the financial contribution they are now signed up to do. The problem is, if this crisis is going to be solved, they will probably have to treble or quadruple the contribution that they're going to end up making. It's not yet clear whether the German people and their elected representatives are quite ready to make that commitment. If they're not ready to make that commitment, you know, you and I are going to be pretty nervous because we could yet see a full-scale Eurozone financial crisis.
And Raja, I'm curious, Robert uses the word nervous. You run a restaurant and a travel agency. Are you nervous about how the Eurozone crisis may affect you in Jordan?
Well, definitely it has been affecting everyone in the world. It's like I said, this is a real crisis that I would think what Robert mentioned, that had Germany, it might be involved into this bailout and it might quadruple its contribution. But not doing so might be even worse. There is, I think the euro is at stake itself. The euro vis-a-vis the US dollar, vis-a-vis the Chinese yuan. I think it's beyond just currencies, and it's more, it's political too.
Well, Raj, you're not the only one to raise the issue of whether the euro may disappear at all. We've got to take a couple of minute break, but we'll certainly raise that with the BBC's Robert Peston, who's taking your questions on the Eurozone crisis, because we looked at all the thousands of comments coming into the BBC and we realised you didn't just have concerns, you also had many, many questions because of the complexity of this story. So Robert's joining us to answer some of those questions. Keep them coming. Country code 44 2070 83 72 72. We'll take a break and we'll come back with Robert Peston in a couple of minutes' time. The BBC's World Have Your Say is a place where people come together to talk about the issues, events and experiences that matter most to them. It's live on BBC Radio, online, and now every Friday it's here on BBC World News. And while we may provide the platform, the issues that we discuss are the ones that you're already talking about. This isn't about us interviewing you, it's about you talking to people around the world.
A lot of the power of the programme comes from, say, a taxi driver in Moscow being able to talk to a farmer in Uganda about the same subject. We've taken the programme around the world to many different places. South Africa during the World Cup, we were in Beijing during the Olympics, and we were in Haiti immediately after the earthquake.
Foreign aids need to know that there has always been corruption in this country. Yeah. Make sure everything is distributed the right way.
Right people.
I'm hoping that World Have Your Say on the TV will recreate the atmosphere of the radio and the online site, a gathering together of people around the world to talk in a civilised atmosphere and share ideas and experiences.
These guys are our brothers and sisters, and they have nowhere to go. They have made mistakes along the line in the past. We just have to forgive them.
We want to make World Have Your Say as accessible as we possibly can, so we're not short of contact details. You can phone us up now. The number's country code 44 2070 83 72 72. Of course, we're on Facebook and Twitter as well. Our email is worldhaveyoursay@bbc.com, or you can text us from anywhere on country code 44 7786 20 60 80. And we know that some of those contact details aren't the snappiest, but don't worry, they're all at worldhaveyoursay.com. We're looking forward to hearing from you. Hi, this is Ros Atkins with you live on World Have Your Say. Our guest for the first 30 minutes is the BBC's Robert Peston. He's our business editor and he's taking your questions on the Eurozone crisis. Let's pull up this message on our Facebook page from Devduta Sen in Calcutta, who wants to ask, how does this affect emerging economies like India and China?
Well, I mean, the answer is, Devduta, that you cannot insulate yourself from a crisis of this magnitude. There are now economists saying that the Eurozone will slip back into recession, whatever it does in terms of easing the strains on countries that are having difficulties borrowing. If the Eurozone slips back into recession, that is, that is bad news for the great exporting nations like, India and China, because, the market for their goods and services will be shrinking. When Europeans buy less stuff, they buy less Indian stuff and buy less Chinese stuff. So, we are all connected. Globalization is real. And, if the Eurozone catches a cold, everybody feels a bit ill.
Thank you for answering that question. We're going to bring in Jose in Porto in just a moment, but a couple of quick questions for you, Robert. Jiang in Nigeria is watching and wants to say, what do Germany and France stand to gain in the short term with all of these bailouts?
Well, I mean, it's not so much in the short term. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if any Eurozone economy were to completely collapse, the damage for the core of the Eurozone would be immense. The Eurozone is the biggest market for France, it's the biggest market for Germany. If credit conditions within the Eurozone deteriorate so that households and businesses find it difficult to borrow, that will tip the whole Eurozone into a pretty bad recession. And frankly, nobody in those circumstances wouldn't be feeling significantly worse off. That's why, it's really, really important that a credible a credible rescue plan is put in place.
And I think there may be a one-word answer to this, but George in Uganda would like to ask you, is there hope of a quick recovery?
I think a quick bounce back is now looking, I'm afraid, pretty unlikely, because we're already seeing pretty significant downward momentum in these economies. What we've got to hope is that a credible rescue package is put in place in the next few weeks, which would start to reverse that momentum and, start to encourage a bit more confidence among consumers and businesses, such that they spend a bit more, invest a bit more, and we get a bit of a recovery. But frankly, the really important thing, as I say, is that we get a credible rescue package. Now, we're beginning to see the outlines of what a credible rescue package might look like. It would be expanding the bailout fund, the firepower available to the bailout fund from the current 440 billion to something nearer 2 trillion, so that no investor can possibly doubt that if, for example, Italy can't borrow on the markets, that there won't be money available from official Eurozone sources to lend to Italy. Almost certainly a credible rescue does require Greece's debt burden to be cut significantly more than current proposals imply. Current proposals are talking about a 21% reduction in the debts of the government. most people, including the Treasury Secretary of the US, Tim Geithner, he apparently shares the view that for any kind of sustainable recovery to happen in Greece, they've got to cut their debts by about 50%, a 50% debt write-off. Now, that's only affordable if you massively expand, or it's only a sensible route, if you massively expand the firepower of the bailout fund, and also you inject a lot more capital into the Eurozone's banks so that when the losses emerge, Eurozone banks don't fall over, that they've got the capacity to absorb those losses. That's what a grand rescue plan would look like. We haven't got it yet, and we've got to keep our fingers crossed that we will get a plan of that sort at some stage.
Robert, thanks for your answer. George, thanks for the question on facebook.com/world have your say. Let's bring in Jose in Porto in Portugal. Go ahead, Jose. You're welcome to the show.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Jose.
I'd like to ask if you think it was negligent for the European Union to create a common currency without having previously established proper mechanisms to handle crises such as the current one?
Well, it certainly looks pretty stupid, doesn't it, Jose? I mean, you know, there were lots of people warning that the real flaw in the design of the Eurozone, and they were warning this right from the outset, was that you were getting this monetary union without putting in place mechanisms for central decision-making about how much individual members of the Eurozone should be able to borrow. And what we had, unfortunately, was different countries going off in all sorts of different directions in terms of their economic policies. And so what we've now got is this hugely unstable situation where some countries have borrowed far too much, other countries like Germany have incredibly strong balance sheets, but no very clear mechanism for essentially forcing the Germans to use their financial strength to bail out the others. And therefore, you've got this clash between the sovereignty of individual nations within the Eurozone and what...
OK, we're going to talk Saudi Arabia now. It's been an unlikely week, to say the least. Women have been told they can vote and stand in some elections. And there's been so much attention around the world on one woman in Jeddah who was sentenced to 10 lashes for driving. It now appears that sentence has been revoked. Now, if you're watching in Saudi Arabia, you can call us up. We're live. Country code 44 2070 83 72 72. We're curious to know if things are changing for Saudi women. Let's start with Maha, who joins us on the phone from Saudi Arabia. Maha, tell us what your view of this is. Are things changing for you in your country?
Yes, of course, definitely it's changing. The decision by the king to allow women to participate and be part of the Shura Council and to participate in the next round of the municipal elections in giving women political rights and to give them a voice in terms of in the decision-making process. Although a lot of other steps are still needed. Some might object to the having to wait another 3 years before this happens, but I think it's a big step, and there's a lot that women need time to prepare for those elections, to prepare themselves for participating in
Mahal, your line's just coming in and out. We've heard almost everything you've had to say, but let's see if our engineers can just clear that up a little. In the meantime, let's bring in Nora, who's live with us from Jeddah. Nora, do you feel that your life as a woman in Saudi Arabia is changing?
Hi, definitely. I think the decision announced by King Abdullah is historic, and it's worth celebrating as Saudi women. King Abdullah started with almost our highest priority of participating as equal citizens to our main counterparts. Of course, there are other rights that remain denied, but there is no question that these rights will be reclaimed, and it's just a matter of time.
Are you frustrated at the pace of change, or is it satisfactory to you?
I'd say in between. There are rights that are, as I said, remain denied, such as the guardianship and male consent, and so many other rights that remain, and of course the basic right to drive. But as I said, this political participation right is very important, and it's also very symbolic, and it's almost a milestone for Saudi women's rights pursuit.
Nora, good to speak to you. Those of you watching, we're hearing restrained optimism from those two guests. What's your reaction to this week of developments in Saudi Arabia? You can phone us up, country code 44 2070 83 72 72. Maybe you're a Saudi woman living outside of the country, or you just know the country well. We'd appreciate your support and advice on this. Country code 44 2070 83 72 72. Let's bring in Muna in Riyadh. She's a media personality. Muna, what's been your reaction? Does this represent progress in Saudi Arabia?
Well, of course, the thing about the lashing on the heels of the biggest PR that we had in years, where the king actually said women will be able to politically participate in decision-making apparatus to men. This was the
I'm going to have to jump in there. This is frustrating. That line is coming in and out, and I don't think people watching are going to be able to hear you. Let me go back, if I can, to Merha in Jeddah. Merha, do you wish that you could drive? Is this something which is important to you?
Yes, it is. It's not only important to me, but for every woman in Saudi Arabia, whether she wants to drive now or later, it should be her choice. Those who don't want to drive should not stand up want to, because it is essential in today's society. Women, whether they're working or not, it is their right. And I think I'm optimistic to an extent that eventually women, sooner than later, will be allowed to drive in Saudi Arabia. And the decision made by the king to revoke the lashing sentence is an indication of that, because there's no justification for that sentence.
And Nora, what about you in Jeddah? Some people are suggesting that this driving issue is a distraction, that the Western media is preoccupied with it. But is it important to you whether you can drive or not?
Of course it is important. It's a right, and every right should be given and granted. And whether or not some women or some other citizens do not want to practice that right, it's up to them. The choice should be there. Having said that, though, the whole women rights the whole women rights issue is still very it's at the heart of discussions, and there's so much to be done.
Well, we've heard from 3 women inside of Saudi Arabia. Let's speak to a man now. Nabil is on the phone from Dammam in Saudi Arabia. Nabil, do you welcome the opportunity to vote that has been given to women?
This is a decision made by His Majesty the King, so we all support the King in whatever measures he feels he has a much more farther sight than we do, and whatever the King has decided, we support.
And what about this issue of driving? I know that you've got daughters, because I've spoken to you before on BBC Radio. Do you want your daughters to be able to drive?
Well, as I explained, and you verified for me, one of the highest dangers, the most dangerous place to drive in the world approximately is Saudi Arabia. And I almost daily see, I have to drive about 40 or 50 kilometers to work, and almost on a daily basis I see very, very, very bad accidents, regardless of how safe you drive. Mm-hmm. It's a dangerous place, and I wouldn't like my daughters to drive, no.
Well, Maha, what about you? Is this law protecting you from the dangers of the road?
I don't think the problem, I think the problem is that we don't have strict laws enforcing driving because, you know, obviously it's all men who are driving, and if there is bad driving, then maybe it's the men who shouldn't be driving. Otherwise, what we need is more stricter laws protecting those who are driving and implementing violations on those who are violating the laws.
OK, so you say bring in decent traffic laws and enforcement, but don't stop women from driving. Nora, I wonder about you. Nabil is saying this is in your interest. This is for your good, keeping you off the road. I mean,
Islamists always use this excuse. I agree with the lady that just said that we need to fix the laws rather than deny a right. I would also like to add that some people use this argument that we are here to honor women. How can you speak of honoring women when someone like Miss Madiha Al-Ajroush, who was stopped, and she's 58 years old, and she was subjected to this humiliation of being stopped and then being waiting in the street for 40 minutes to find the taxi, and she wasn't even able to find the taxi. And so many other women that go unheard or unreported, that are subjected to humiliation on a daily basis just to find a driver or find a drive to work or to sometimes emergency like hospitals.
Okay, so that's interesting. You're saying this law isn't just about driving, it's a way sometimes of humiliating women in Saudi Arabia. Now, Nabil's gone. Thank you very much to him for joining us. And the three remaining guests. Let me read you this tweet, which has been retweeted all over the world over the past few days, from Olivia Nicole in Chicago, who wrote, "Saudi women, so many Muslim women would love to live in Saudi. Stop trying to chase Western dreams and appreciate what you have." Muna in Riyadh, do you think that you should appreciate what you have and stop pushing for change?
Of course not, but I understand where she's coming from. If we look at, for example, one of the top countries, the top 10 countries in the world for gender equity is Philippines. Women there have reached high percentages. It's the only Asian country actually that received such high gender cap diminishing, on the political arena, on the economic arena, etc. However, no Saudi woman would want to go and live there because the economic situation in the Philippines is very bad. What is keeping Saudi Arabia afloat is because we have such a great economy that did not, even get affected by the recession, the worldwide recession. So once that's not the case, then a lot of issues will pop up. I think exception to Mr. Nabil telling us what we should or shouldn't do, and I think this is the problem in Saudi Arabia, is that men believe they know.
And I wonder if you're a Muslim woman watching us, do you agree with that tweet when it says Muslim women should not aspire to be like Western women? By all means, tweet us using the WISE hashtag. David in Canada says the king should hurry up with reform in Saudi Arabia. Now, stay with us. We're going to take a little break before we come back here on BBC World News. I'm Ross Atkins. Thanks for joining me on today's World Have Your Say. We started off talking about the Eurozone. Now we're talking about the experience of being a woman in Saudi Arabia. Let's cross to Danny, who's at the World Have Your Say news desk, where all your calls are being answered. Danny, what have we heard in the last few minutes?
Well, a lot of people saying how pleased they are, first of all, to see our Saudi guests on camera and, of course, wishing them well. Let's just get a taste of some of those comments. Nadine writes on Facebook, Abdullah's political future in part depended on him overturning it, particularly as he's on a PR drive right now to show the international community and Saudi opposition that he is open to reform. Sani tells us also on Facebook that is the best decision he could take since he's afraid of criticism from the West. And Harriet writes, way to go. If he didn't, it would have made nonsense of the earlier law that will now enable women to vote. Well, don't forget, you can take part in our global conversation by joining that hashtag on the bottom of your screens now.
Danny, thanks very much. Yes, use the WISE hashtag if you want to join us on Twitter. I can see calls coming in from Libya, France, Canada, Sierra Leone, Antigua, Pakistan, Argentina and Nigeria. Keep those calls coming. If you don't get onto the TV edition of World Have Your Say, we've also a radio edition in just over an hour's time on BBC World Service Radio, and we'll put some of the comments you call in up on the screen during our time here on BBC World News TV. Now, just before the break, I mentioned that tweet suggesting that Muslim women shouldn't aspire to be Western women. Nora, still with us live from Jeddah. Do you want to live the life of a Western woman?
I don't know how, in what way are you defining it? Islam came to honor women, and our rights that we are demanding and we're waiting for is all given to us and guaranteed for us by Islam. So when I ask for my right, it's a right that was granted, God give me.
There are some suggestions, some Saudi men have been writing online that if you let women drive, then the next thing will be they'd start dressing in a modest way, and before you know it, they start behaving as they see like decadent Western women. What do you say to those concerns?
I don't think this is an argument that this has nothing, driving a car or moving around has nothing to do with the way you dress. I don't see this as an argument. It's not an argument to me.
Nora, very good to speak to you. Do come back on World Have Your Say. There's Nora in Jeddah. Let's switch from Jeddah to New York and speak to Dr. Kanta Ahmed, who is an author and a practicing doctor. She's on Twitter on the misdiagnosis Twitter hashtag. Now, Dr. Ahmed, you aren't Saudi Arabian, but you know the country well. Do you think that the experience of being a woman in Saudi Arabia is changing and needs to change?
Without question. It really is changing very rapidly. And of course, we only see this in snapshots when events come to the news in the Western media, but the change has actually been quite steady and rather inexorable. The advances in their education and in their employment opportunities are tremendous, their ability to interact in public discourse, and of course the latest events on the 25th of September with the arrival of their chance to stand for election, which is really a great development. I think it's very important, I've been looking at some of the comments, not to vilify the role of Saudi men, which often seems to occur. There are many men in Saudi Arabia who very much want women to drive because of the burden of not being able to have mobile family members. It's a real hardship on them to arrange the strategic movement and transport of their family members. So a lot of these innovations are really supported by Saudi male citizens.
All right, well, it's very good to have you on the programme. I can see that Abdul Rahman in Saudi Arabia has just tweeted us saying, "We, the Saudis, are backing our king in his vision to provide extra roles for women. Driving is inevitable," he says. Well, let's bring in Camelia, who's with us from Jeddah. Camelia, do you agree that it is now inevitable that women will be allowed to drive in time?
I think it's just a matter of time. Perhaps we're not moving as fast as we would like, but it is just a matter of time, and progress will happen. What we are not aware of, and we are not sure of, is are there the systems and framework that is required for women to go ahead and be on the street, the practicalities of it. So that's the thing that we're not aware of. It's probably behind the screen somewhere. My gut feeling tells me is that there is a huge momentum that's going on and taking care of that. But again, what we have within the country, I think it's a lack of good communication between the various probably ministries or parties. And I think what happened this week is a great example of that miscommunication within the Saudi government and jurisprudence systems as a whole.
Thank you very much indeed for being on the programme. Looking at the three of you, I wish we had more time there to hear you discuss these issues. We're completely out of time on today's World Have Your Say. I'm certain we'll return to the experience of being a woman in Saudi Arabia sooner rather than later. But thank you very much to all of our guests who joined us live. Don't forget, World Have Your Say will be on BBC World Service Radio in just over an hour's time. You can listen to that at bbcworldservice.com. And if you've got something you'd like to talk about with the rest of the world, you can always send us an email, a tweet or a Facebook message. I'll speak to you very soon. Goodbye.